Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's likely on your mind, especially if you're in a demanding field like medicine or dentistry, or frankly, if you're just serious about learning effectively.
Uh-huh.
We've got a fresh, systematic review that unpacks how different teaching methods impact the way students learn. Are
Mhm.
they really understanding things deeply, just trying to get by, or, taking a more strategic approach?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And crucially, how does all of this connect to their academic success?
Right.
For you, someone who values getting knowledge quickly and thoroughly, this deep dive is really all about understanding how to navigate different learning environments
No.
and different teaching styles to your advantage.
Okay.
This review, it's pretty new, from Educational Psychology Review, October 2024. Look closely at 49 studies
Huh.
spanning from 2000 to 2023.
Wow, quite a range.
Yeah. So our goal here is to distill what's most important. Do different teaching methods actually steer medical and dental students towards certain learning habits? And is that a key factor in their achievements?
And you mentioned previous findings were a bit inconsistent.
That's right. What's particularly interesting is that past research hasn't always lined up perfectly.
Hmm.
So we're aiming to bring, well, maybe some clarity to the puzzle.
Okay, let's unpack the first key piece of this puzzle then. These learning approaches. What exactly are we talking about here?
Okay, think of learning approaches as sort of the different mental gears students engage when they're faced with new material. The review highlights three main ones.
Right.
First, there's the deep approach. This is fueled by like a real curiosity to understand the subject,
Mm-hmm.
to connect the dots between different ideas, and to truly grasp the meaning. Students using this approach tend to reflect on what they've learned. Essentially, they're learning to know why.
No, why? I like that. So that's the ideal, maybe.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And this review generally links that to better academic outcomes.
So what's the approach that's maybe less effective? The opposite end.
Right. On the other end, we have the surface approach. Here, the main aim is often just to scrape by. Rote memorization, focusing on the bare minimum needed to pass an exam.
Just get through it.
Yeah, exactly. There's often a lack of genuine interest, maybe driven by a fear of failing, or even just feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information.
Which must happen a lot in med school.
Oh, absolutely. And not surprisingly, this approach is often associated with underperforming.
Okay. And then there's a middle ground, right? You mentioned three. The strategic approach.
Precisely. The strategic approach is kind of a blend. Students using this are usually well-organized, they manage their time effectively,
Uh-huh.
and they're very aware of what's expected of them in terms of grades and assignments.
Right.
They're determined to excel.
So they play the game, in a way.
You could say that. They're flexible enough to use both deep and surface strategies depending on what the situation calls for. And this approach also tends to lead to good academic results.
Interesting. These ideas have been around for a while, haven't they? I think their review mentioned some foundational research.
Yes, definitely. These aren't brand new concepts. The review points back to the work of Martin and Selye in the 1970s. They first identified the deep and surface approaches.
Okay.
Then, in the 1980s and later, researchers like Biggs and Entwistle really expanded on this. They added the strategic approach and also developed ways to actually measure these tendencies.
Measuring something like a learning approach sounds tricky. How do researchers even do that?
That's a great question. It is tricky. Researchers have developed various inventories. Think of these like surveys, basically. They're designed to uncover your natural tendencies when faced with learning material.
Questionnaires and things.
Exactly. Biggs Study Process Questionnaire, the SPQ, and Entwistle and Ramsden's approaches to studying inventory, or ASI, were some of the early influential ones.
Right.
Over time, these have been refined. The revised two-factor study process questionnaire, or RSPQ-2F, and the approaches and study skills inventory for students, known as ASSIST.
Assist.
Okay, those are now among the most commonly used. And interestingly, ASSIST and RSPQ-2F were the go-to tools in most of the studies this review looked at.
So someone fills out a questionnaire, and that gives you a snapshot of how they typically approach learning, like a personality type for studying.
It gives an indication of their approach at that specific time. But, and this is a really important point for you, the listener, to understand, these approaches aren't set in stone. They're not like personality types, fixed forever.
Oh, okay, so you can change.
Definitely. The review really highlights that students can and do change their learning approach depending on a whole variety of factors.
Like what?
Well, things like how challenging a course is, the workload, how stressed they are, their level of motivation. Even personal circumstances can all play a role.
Right.
It affects whether they adopt a deep, surface, or strategic approach at any given time. This adaptability is key. It suggests you actually have the potential to influence your own learning.
That's really empowering, actually. Okay, so we have these different ways students learn, and they're flexible. Now let's switch gears and talk about the teaching methods the review focused on, specifically in medical and dental education. What are the common approaches there?
Well, the review points to a pretty significant evolution in medical and dental education over recent decades.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a strong movement towards methods that prioritize, long-term knowledge retention and the development of critical thinking skills, trying to move away from just memorizing facts.
Makes sense for doctors and dentists.
Absolutely. The review specifically looked at 4 main teaching methods that have been studied quite extensively in this context.
All right, lay them out for us. What are the 4 main teaching styles they considered?
Okay, first up is problem-based learning, or PBL.
Right, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's pretty common now. This method centers around presenting students with real-world clinical scenarios or problems. They work in small groups, usually with a facilitator.
Guiding them.
Exactly. Guiding, not lecturing. They discuss the problem, identify what they need to learn to solve it, go off and do some independent study, and then come back together to share their findings and potential solutions.
So it's very active.
Very active. The main goal here is to foster critical thinking and the ability to apply knowledge in practical situations.
Okay, sounds very different from just listening to a lecture. What's the second method?
The second is what they term in-practice teaching. This is kind of a broad category encompassing a whole range of hands-on experiences.
Ah, like clinical stuff.
Right. In the initial years, it often involves a mix of lectures, lab work, anatomical dissections. But as students progress, it moves towards early clinical skills training, surgical skills practice, rotations through different departments, clerkships.
The real-world application?
Precisely. The emphasis here is on engaging multiple senses, seeing, hearing, touching, and applying theoretical knowledge in real or simulated clinical settings. For someone in medicine or dentistry, this hands-on experience is obviously critical.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense for these fields. What about the more modern, tech-driven approaches? Did they look at e-learning?
They did. The third method is e-learning. This has become, well, incredibly common, especially recently.
Sure.
It provides remote access to a wealth of online resources. This can include recorded lectures you can watch on your own time, digital learning materials, educational videos, interactive games, practice tests with immediate feedback.
Lots of flexibility there.
Huge flexibility.
Yeah.
The big advantage here is the potential for self-directed learning, at your own pace and convenience.
Okay. And the final one sounds like the more, let's say, traditional approach.
Yes, the fourth category is traditional didactic teaching. This primarily refers to lectures and tutorials. Your classic university model, maybe.
The sage on the stage.
Kind of, yeah. The review notes that while these are still prevalent, there's a concern that they might sometimes lean to a more superficial understanding.
Why is that?
Potentially, because they don't always actively engage students. And sometimes they can lead to cognitive overload. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose of information, right?
Yeah.
Not much actually sticks.
Yeah, I can relate to that feeling. Okay, so we've got these 4 main ways of teaching: PBL, in-practice, e-learning, and traditional didactic. Now for the million-dollar question. How do these teaching methods actually influence whether students adopt a deep, strategic, or surface approach to learning? And ultimately, how well they perform?
Right, and this is where the review offers some really interesting and perhaps unexpectedly nuanced findings.
Oh, how so?
Well, contrary to what some educational reforms might have hoped for, the study suggests that the teaching methods themselves don't seem to have a massive direct impact on consistently guiding students towards one specific learning approach or guaranteeing their academic success.
Really? That's surprising.
It is a bit. The big takeaway here, perhaps for you listening, is that your learning habits might actually be more crucial than the teacher-specific style.
Huh. So you'd think a method like PBL, with its focus on problem solving and understanding, would naturally push students towards deeper learning, wouldn't you?
You would absolutely think so, and there is some evidence to support that idea. The review did observe certain patterns, certain co-occurrences.
Like what?
For example, a deep learning approach.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was observed relatively consistently across all 4 teaching methods, and it was generally associated with either no significant difference in performance or, more often, with high performance.
Okay. And the strategic approach?
Similarly, a strategic approach was also mainly linked to high performance, and then sometimes no difference. Again, this was seen across the various teaching methods, not just confined to one.
Interesting. So where does the surface approach fit in? The one that's generally linked to poorer outcomes.
Yeah, the surface approach was mostly associated with low performance or, again, sometimes no significant difference. But here's the key thing. It was found across all 4 teaching methods,
Even PBL.
even PBL, which, as you pointed out, was partly intended to minimize it.
So PBL isn't a guaranteed fix for surface learning then.
Apparently not. The results with PBL were actually quite mixed in the studies reviewed. While some studies did show that students who naturally favored deep and strategic approaches thrived in PBL environments, others actually indicated an increase in surface learning among some students using PBL.
An increase? Why would that happen?
The review suggests that the added stress that PBL can sometimes create for certain individuals might be a contributing factor. It can be demanding, self-directed. Maybe that pressure pushes some towards just trying to get by, adopting surface strategies.
Wow. Stress leading to a more surface-level approach that definitely makes sense in a high-pressure environment like med or dental school.
Absolutely.
What about the in-practice teaching, the clinical stuff? Did that show a clearer pattern?
Again, the findings were somewhat contradictory. Mixed bag.
Really?
Yeah. Some studies reported a decline in deep learning and an increase in surface learning as students progressed into their clinical years.
Decline. Why?
Potentially due to the heavier workload and increased responsibilities, more pressure, maybe less time for deep reflection. However, other studies suggested the opposite, an increase in deep and strategic approaches as students gained more practical experience and their understanding matured. So, it's complicated. Context really seems to matter.
It sounds like it. And e-learning, with all its flexibility, how did that factor in? Any clearer results there?
Well, e-learning had its own nuances. The review found that the perception of being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information available.
Information overload.
Exactly. That feeling could actually lead some students towards adopting surface approaches, just trying to survive the flood of material.
Okay.
And perhaps not surprisingly, students who primarily used a surface approach in e-learning settings often tended to underperform.
But what about the deep and strategic learners using e-learning?
And this is an important point, especially if you utilize online learning resources. Students who naturally favor deep and strategic approaches tended to perform well regardless. It didn't matter whether e-learning was used by itself or mixed with other teaching methods, they found a way to make it work for them.
So maybe it's less about the teaching method itself dictating how we learn and more about how our own natural learning inclinations, our preferred approach, meshes with what that method demands from us.
That's a very insightful way to put it. I think that captures the nuance well. The review really suggests that the key might not be the teaching method in isolation, but rather the alignment or maybe misalignment between a student's inherent learning approach and the specific demands and structure of a particular method.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like, if you naturally enjoy critical thinking and digging into problems, you might indeed find that PBL's focus suits your deep learning style really well, and you thrive. But someone else might find that same structure stressful or inefficient.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the connection between teaching style and learning approach is, well, it's complex. But what about the influence of the learning approach itself on academic performance? Is that relationship clear? Did the review find a stronger link there?
Yes, much stronger, actually. The review found a more consistent link here than between teaching method and approach.
Okay, tell me about that. What about the surface learners?
Well, students who predominantly used a surface approach generally tended to struggle, especially, as we mentioned, when faced with pressure and heavy workloads.
Right.
Most of the studies showed a negative correlation between a surface approach and academic performance. Poorer grades, essentially.
Mostly negative, but not always.
Right. Some studies did report no significant difference, and there was one really interesting exception. A study where a surface approach actually correlated with high marks.
High marks, that seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it was in a very specific situation. The assessment basically involved memorizing answers to a known set of questions for a simple pass-fail exam.
Okay. So it was an assessment that basically rewarded rote memorization.
Exactly. It was almost tailor-made for a surface approach to lead to a successful outcome, meaning passing the test, even if it didn't result in any lasting understanding.
Right. Ticking the box versus actually learning. What about students who tend towards deep and strategic learning? How did they fare?
The picture was much more positive for them, generally speaking. Numerous studies showed a clear positive association between deep and strategic learning approaches and better academic results. Higher grades, better performance.
So mostly positive? Any exceptions there?
Well, some studies also found no significant relationship. Things aren't always black and white in research. But crucially, no study in this entire review linked a deep approach to lower performance. That seems quite telling.
That is significant. No downside to aiming for deep understanding.
It seems that way. There's one study that showed a negative link with the strategic approach, but the review noted it had some potential methodological issues, specifically around how they measured the approaches using a self-determined questionnaire. So maybe take that one with a grain of salt.
Okay. So generally speaking, aiming for deep understanding and being strategic about how you learn, those are pretty good bets for academic success.
It certainly looks that way based on this large body of evidence.
But does that success, that initial learning, translate into retaining knowledge over the long term? Does the approach matter for memory?
That's a really critical question, isn't it? Especially in fields like medicine. And the review touches on a longitudinal finding that's definitely worth highlighting.
Okay.
It appears that both students who initially used a surface approach and those who used a deep approach can experience a decline in knowledge retention over the course of a year if the information isn't consistently reinforced.
Wow, so even deep learners can forget if they don't practice.
Exactly. It really underscores the importance of ongoing engagement with the material. You need to revisit it, retrieve it, work with it periodically, regardless of how deeply you thought you learned it initially.
Use it or lose it, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Continuous reinforcement seems key for long-term retention.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Let's try to boil it down. What are the real aha moments for someone listening who wants to become a more effective learner based on this review?
I think there are several key takeaways for you, the listener.
Okay.
First, maybe the most important realization is that there's no single magic bullet teaching method.
Right. No one size fits all.
Exactly. Your own natural learning approach, how you tend to engage with material, might actually be a more influential factor in your academic journey than the specific teaching style you encounter.
That puts some of the power back in the student's hands, which is good.
It does. It's an encouraging thought.
Okay. What else should we keep in mind?
Second, while deep and strategic learning are generally the most beneficial routes to take for genuine understanding and good performance, it's interesting to see that even a surface approach can lead to success in very specific, often poorly designed, assessment-focused contexts, like that memorization exam.
But that's probably not the kind of success most people are aiming for long term.
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
It's unlikely to lead to lasting knowledge or true understanding. Third, and this came up a few times, we just can't ignore the significant impact of workload and pressure.
Yeah, the stress factor.
Huge factor. These things can really influence your learning approach, potentially pushing you towards less effective surface strategies, even if your natural inclination is towards deeper understanding. Managing that stress is crucial.
Good point. And the final big takeaway for our listeners, something about retention.
Yes, that long-term retention piece. It isn't automatically guaranteed by any single learning approach, not even the deep one. It really seems to depend on the consistent reinforcement of that knowledge over time.
Revisiting the material.
Revisiting, testing yourself, applying it. Even if you're someone who strives for deep understanding initially, you still need to actively engage with the material down the line to ensure it sticks.
This is all incredibly valuable insight. Now, the review also briefly mentions looking towards the future. Something about the potential role of cognitive neuroscience in education. Where does that fit into this picture?
Yeah, that was an interesting point they raised. The review suggests that rather than solely focusing on, say, tweaking curricula or forcing specific teaching methods to try and make students adopt certain learning approaches, a potentially more universally effective direction might be to develop a deeper understanding, both for educators and students, of how the brain actually learns.
The science behind learning itself.
Exactly. Concepts from cognitive neuroscience like the neuroplasticity, the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself through learning and experience,
Right.
and understanding the importance of things like repetition, retrieval practice, spacing out your studying.
And managing those other factors.
Yes, and managing factors like stress, getting enough sleep, effective time management. These are fundamental to learning, really, regardless of the teaching method or your preferred approach. They impact everyone.
So teaching students about the science of learning itself could be a more impactful strategy than just changing the teaching method.
That's the idea,
Mm.
potentially. If both students and educators had a solid grasp of the cognitive neuroscience of learning, well, it could lead to more personalized and effective learning strategies.
Makes sense.
And also maybe a greater awareness of the factors that either support or hinder the learning process for them individually. It's about empowering learners with knowledge about their own brains and how they function best.
This has truly been a deep dive into this systematic review. Really fascinating stuff. To bring it all together for our listener, what's the core message you'd want them to remember from all this?
I think the most crucial takeaway is that the relationship between teaching methods, how you as an individual approach learning, and your academic performance is, well, it's complex.
Yeah.
And it's highly personal.
And not simple answers.
Definitely not. There's no single perfect teaching style that guarantees success for everyone. However, by understanding the different learning approaches, deep, strategic, and surface, and becoming aware of the various factors that can influence which approach you adopt.
Like stress, workload, motivation.
Exactly. By understanding those things, you can become a more informed, more adaptable, and ultimately a more effective learner, no matter what educational environment you find yourself in.
So the whole idea of a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, it might not be the most effective path forward.
It seems less likely based on this review.
Instead, maybe a more profound understanding of the learning process itself and our own individual learning styles and tendencies could be far more valuable in the long run.
Precisely. I think that's a great summary.
That brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Take some time, maybe after this, to consider your own preferred learning style. How do you tend to tackle new information? And think about how you might consciously adjust your study habits or how you engage with different teaching methods based on some of these insights.
Yeah, what practical steps could you take?
Right. What adjustments could you make starting now to enhance your learning, enhance your knowledge retention, no matter what teaching approach your professor or your course is using?
Maybe exploring some resources on cognitive neuroscience and effective learning strategies could be a fantastic next step in that journey.
Absolutely. Food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.